Now, with the window coming to an end in the next few days, Liverpool still need to make some important business. Of course, we all know about Alexander Isak and that situation, but there's also a situation developing at Crystal Palace with Marc Guehi. Now, in this video, we're going to go through exactly why I think Liverpool need him more than anyone right now in their team, and what you can expect from him if he is to sign for Liverpool this summer. So let's get into it. Now, I'm not going to go on about Liverpool's need for defensive talents because we kind of spoke about it in the Leone video, but it is clear that Liverpool not only maybe want an Isak to come into the team, but they need other players. If that's a midfielder, if that's a defender, they need depth because their team is going to struggle with the ages and the reliability of players like Konate at the back. And that is where Mark Guayi comes in. Someone who's a market opportunity with 1 year left on his deal, probably being able to agree a fee for about 30 to 40 million pounds, and also being an England international and being a very physical Premier League defender. Exactly what Liverpool need, not only as backup, but someone that can come into the team and offer that quality right now. As someone like Leone, you probably have to wait a little bit. Now, it's good to say, first of all, that Mark Guayi plays in a 3-back for Crystal Palace right now, but he used to play in a 4-back. And despite being right-footed, he plays on the left side of the defence, which may remind you about a certain someone who plays in the back line for Liverpool. Maybe there's some similarities there. Now, Mark Guayi has played in a back 4, and for Liverpool, if he came into the team, I think he can easily play on this right-hand side for someone like Konate if Konate's injured or not playing well, or he can play on this left-hand side if you want to rest Van Dijk, which has to be a consideration. Maybe not in these big games, but in at least some of the smaller Premier League games, Guayi is going to have to play over him. Now, Mark Guayi is a very aggressive defender, and it is very well known that he isn't the most brilliant player within the air. He's a small defender in that aspect, only being around 6 foot, and he's not someone that you want to be dominant in these positions. Now, alongside a Van Dijk, for instance, alongside a Konate, that is not an issue. These two are dominant in the air, and you should expect some sort of progression to be stopped from the wingers anyway. Like even Dominic Szoboszlai were a good fullback who can stop crosses coming in, and Alisson's a brilliant goalkeeper to claim the ball and come out. So, you know, that is not really an issue you think about. Now, Mark Guayi in a back 4 for Palace has been known to be one of these more aggressive type of defenders. What I mean by that is he's not always coming out and coming here like we may talk about someone like Mascara for Arsenal, for instance, that being his his main thing he does. But Mark Guayi is a player that will come out and stop attackers getting the ball very quickly. He has to be very good at his timings and discipline because he doesn't have that physical height and sometimes not even the physical stature to be able to beat these players in that sort of ability. So he gets close to them and he can win the ball from these quick areas, coming away with it in these midfield positions. And something that's really interesting is when he's quite proactive in these midfield positions, on the ball is where I think you get to see the best of Mark Guayi. He is really good at running deeply with the ball through challenges. You sometimes see these mazy runs he goes on with the ball and they're dominant, physical, and he continues to run with it. It pulls players towards him, it creates space for other players, and he is able to just go through them or pass the ball off. Doesn't do this a lot, and you look at the stats, it's not consistent, but you don't expect a centre-back to be doing this every week. It's just a nice little feature he can have to break the press and kind of pushes you up through that midfield. If you get people like Gravenberch or McAllister to kind of come out wider, kind of occupy these half-space areas a little bit more, Guayi can take that ball through and put the ball through to them, where then Liverpool have an overload. And I think as soon as you get the ball to Liverpool in these attacking positions with this amount of players through, you're not really worrying. It's about getting the ball there, which is going to be the biggest thing for Liverpool this season. And you see a great example of that here. You know, he wins the ball back in this position just over the defender. And if I let it play, you can see he receives the ball down, he picks the ball up, and he ends up taking the two players on really well. Now, this is an ability he has to just continue to run through these challenges consistently for them and break these lines. You see the midfielders come here, and then he can pass the ball off anywhere he wants. And something to note, we talk about his aggressive defending style and having to kind of push out that defence. He hasn't done it as much in this back 3 for Palace because he's been on this left side of it, and this actually means he has to cover a lot of these wide areas. You actually see him be very good at trying to stop these players in these wide areas, and if we skip a bit forward, you can see he ends up winning the ball quite calmly, being able to recover fast. Something about Guayi is that he is quite a quick player for a defender. He isn't exceptionally fast, but he is good enough to stop a lot of players in this league. So when players are running against him, running back the other way, he's really good at recovering very quickly and getting there to make the tackle. And it's something that he is actually quite profound at doing, and I think could help Liverpool on this sort of chaotic basketball approach they have. Being able to run back is going to be a vital component, and with Van Dijk's reliability, with Konate's injury problems, that's not necessarily what you want to see in every game. Guayi needs to come on later and provide that stability, at least showing some legs in there. Now, I also do want to mention that in these defensive positions, maybe in the box, in these sort of areas, he isn't the worst player in the air. He's actually okay because he can pin players back like this and kind of like track them and try and get in front of them and stop the balls, which is something he is really good because despite not being the tallest, he can quite maneuver himself in front of players when they don't expect it. But the last thing about really his defending that I think is quite key is interceptions are a major part. If you look at his stats, his interceptions are quite promising, I think, and his tackles and blocks are also quite promising as well. And I think it's because as a defender, he is probably better away from the ball or off the ball than he is necessarily being that physical one all the time, despite it being sometimes his role. And what I mean by that is the real approach that he has of coming this short to get people and win the ball back is because of his intelligence. There'll be times where there's players running through like this and he's got to cover these runs, and instead of like just tracking this runner like you expect this way, he'll be very smart and very brave and courageous to actually just cut off the pass before it gets there, making this run in front of the defender and taking the ball away with him. Now this is not something that defenders do all the time. It is quite proactive, can be quite risky, and I want to see how that works with Liverpool. Liverpool really do, I think, in their team prioritise being risky and taking chances anywhere on the pitch, and even if they do concede, you see a lot of their goals they're going to concede, and I think they will concede a lot this season, will be through just taking risks. Konate will go hunting for the ball sometimes to leave this gap in behind, and it will cause the team to concede. The same with Frimpong, the same with Kershkev. You can ask the same about anyone else. So is it really what you want? No, but is it going to be okay for this team specifically? I think so. Now, the last thing I really wanted to get into for Liverpool is obviously the in-possession stuff. Now, in terms of build-up, that is a big part of Liverpool. You look at Van Dijk, and his big part of Van Dijk is when he comes in is just being able to quickly shift that ball out to Salah, out to Gakpo, and get them one-on-ones. It's not only that, it's about tempo, control, and when you know how to do it. He's not always going every 3 seconds, I'm going to go and pass the ball to Gakpo, because it just would be too predictable. Van Dijk doesn't do it that much, but as soon as you give him a little bit too much space in these defensive areas, he takes it. And in terms of pressing, there's going to be a lot of pressing in this league now. I think a lot of teams are going to be a lot braver. So I think in terms of Guayi, if we bring him in again, when he's in these situations, he's a very good press-resistant person. We said about, taking the ball, going past these players when he needs to, but it's also about that passing. Now, because he is right-footed, he is mostly going to pass the ball over this side to Salah. Now, that is what you want from Liverpool. You want Salah really receiving the ball quickly in a one-on-one and getting the wingers out it quick. And you would rather Salah get it than Gakpo. I think even on this left-hand side, you're more likely to see build-up progression from Kershkev running or Wirtz sort of creating in this sort of half-spacey area and then leaving off to Gakpo to really get the effort round here, because I'm not going to lie, I'm not the biggest fan of Gakpo in these deeper areas. I think round here is where you want him. So I think in terms of Guayi, his passing will be a downgrade on Van Dijk, but that's not really a surprise. And I think the fact he can just be able to shift the ball out this way will be very important, because something he does about being these defenders, he opens his body up and can shift the ball clearly out to the wide length, which I think makes it even better. And that's the thing with Marc Guehi. You look at his age, you look at his profile, it makes a lot of sense given the market opportunity effect of it, given the fact he's only got a year left, and Crystal Palace rejected a 70 mil bid last year from Newcastle, if you remember that. So I think in that sense it makes a lot of sense in depth. And when you look at some of the opponents of Liverpool, like Man City, maybe not as much, but Arsenal, like Chelsea, they are getting good depth everywhere on the pitch. So getting 30 to 40 mil for this player who's an England international, can play at the highest level that we've seen for years, I think it isn't the worst deal in the world. And I think it's actually much needed, more than an Isak, but an Isak is a very fun one, I will say. And I also think that leaves people like Joe Gomez allowed to leave and kind of frees up the squad a little bit. But let me know in the comments what you guys think about Marc Guehi, and I'll see you in the next one.